The least common multiple, also known as LCM, is the smallest number that is a multiple of two or more numbers. There are a lot of different methods that you can use to find the least common multiple, including making a list, prime factorization, and something called the slide method. So let's look at all of these. Let's start with a list. In a list, you are just listing out all of the multiples of certain numbers. So this is asking for the least common multiple of 8 and 6. Well, I'm going to start by listing all of the multiples of 8. And I start with 8 times 1, which is 8. Then 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times 3 is 24. 8 times 4 is 32. 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 6 is 48. 8 times 7 is 56. 8 times 8 is 64. 8 times 9 is 72. And 8 times 10 is 80. I'll stop right there and go on to 6. Sometimes you have to go further than that. It just depends on what you find when you start doing your other list. So when I go to 6, I'm going to do 6 times 1, which is 6, and I'm going to always check my first list. I notice that there's not a 6 in my first list, so I need to move on. 6 times 2 is 12, so I go back to my first list, and there's not a 12, so I need to move on. 6 times 3 is 18. Again, I go back to my first list. There is no 18, so I need to move on. 6 times 4 is 24. So I go back to my first list, and this time I notice that there is a 24 in my first list, which means that the first multiple that these two numbers have in common is 24. So their LCM is 24. Now let's use prime factorization to find the least common multiple of 12 and 20. With prime factorization, we're going to use factor trees to find all of the prime factors of each number. So we'll start with 12. I know that 12 is an even number, so I can multiply 2 times 6 to get 12. 2 is a prime number, so I'm going to circle it. But 6 is not a prime number, so I need to break it down further. 6 is the same as saying 2 times 3. Now, both of these are prime numbers, so I'm going to circle them. Since nothing else can be made into a prime number, then the prime factorization of 12 is 2 times 2 times 3. Now we need to look at the prime factorization of 20. I know that 20 is an even number, so I can do 2 times 10. 2 is a prime number, but 10 is not, so I need to break it down further. 10 can be changed into 2 times 5. And in this case, both 2 and 5 are prime numbers. So 20 is the same as saying 2 times 2 times 5. Now, I need to know how to use this to find the LCM. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my two prime factorizations, and I'm going to find what they have in common. So they both have 2 2's. When I find the LCM, I'm going to multiply numbers together, but I'm not going to multiply duplicates. So since they both have 2 2's, I'm only going to write the 2 2's one time. Then 12 has 3. 20 doesn't have that 3, so I'm going to write it here. And 20 has a 5, which 12 doesn't have, so I'm going to write this here. And now I'm going to just multiply. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 3 is 12, and 12 times 5 is 60. So the LCM, or least common multiple, of 12 and 20 is 60. Now let's use the slide method to find the least common multiple of 24 and 36. When I use the slide method, I start by writing my numbers. So 24 and 36. What I'm looking for is a common factor that both of these have in common. I know that they're both even numbers, so I know that they're both divisible by 2. So I'm going to put a 2 out here, and then I'm going to come down, and I'm going to write what each of these are. So if I would do 24 divided by 12, I would get or divided by 2, I'm sorry, I would get 12. If I do 36 divided by 2, I get 18. So if I look at 12 and 18, they're not prime numbers yet. They both still have numbers that they have in common. So I'm going to try to find something else that is divisible by both of these. I know that 12 is divisible by 2, 3, 4, and 6. And I know that 18 is divisible by 2, 3, 6, 9. So the number that they have in common seems to be 6. So I'm going to put a 6 here. Now I need to find out what I can multiply 6 by to get each of these. So 12 divided by 6 would give me 2, and 18 divided by 6 would give me 3. So now I have 2 and 3. To find my least common multiple, because now 2 and 3 have nothing in common, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an L. And that L signifies that I'm making my least common multiple. I'm going to take all of these numbers and I am going to multiply them together. 2 times 6 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. And 24 times 3 is 72. That means that the LCM of 24 and 36 is 72. Emery's timer is set to beep every 10 minutes. Denisha's timer is set to beep every 8 minutes. If the timers began at the same time, how many minutes will it be until they beep together? For this kind of problem, I know that I'm looking for a time in the future, so that is going to be a multiple. I can choose a method that I feel comfortable with to find the least common multiple for 10 and 8. So if I make a list, I'm going to find the multiples of 10. Well, 10 times 1 is 10. 10 times 2 is 20. 10 times 3 is 30. 10 times 4 is 40. 10 times 5 is 50. 10 times 6 is 60. 10 times 7 is 70. 10 times 8 is 80. 10 times 9 is 90. And 10 times 10 is 100. So now let's find the multiples of 8 and see what they have in common. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times 3 is 24. 8 times 4 is 32. 8 times 5 is 40. And what I notice now is that I finally have a number that both sets have in common. This means that the least common multiple for 8 and 10 is 40. For my last one, Jorge is buying hot dogs and hot dog buns. If hot dogs come in packs of 8 and buns come in packs of 12, what is the smallest amount of each that he can purchase to ensure that he has an equal number of buns and hot dogs? So let's use my slide method here. I know I'm looking for 8 and 12. And if I'm trying to think of a number that they have in common, they are both even numbers, so I know they're both divisible by 2. Well, if I do 8 divided by 2, I'm going to get 4. And if I do 12 divided by 2, I'm going to get 6. If I look at 4 and 6, they still have a number in common. I can divide both of these by 2 also. So 4 divided by 2 would give me 2, and 6 divided by 2 would give me 3. Now 2 and 3 are both prime numbers, which means they're not going to have anything in common. So now I can draw my L, and I can find my least common multiple by multiplying these numbers together. 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 3 is 24. So the LCM of 8 and 12 is 24. That means that he would need to have 24 hot dogs and 24 hot dog buns.